The Galactic Council banished Earth forever. Humanity only smiled and began preparing. The translator bead in my ear was still speaking when the chamber erupted. 47 alien delegates rose from their curved seats in a single wave, their glowing sigils flaring bright above their heads. The sound they made was not applause. It was not celebration. It was something older and colder, the sound of a verdict being sealed. I was standing at the human podium in the center of Chamber 7, Vega Prime Station, and I could feel every single pair of alien eyes on me. Some had 4 eyes. Some had none, and they perceived the room through organs I had no name for. But all of them, in that moment, were pointed at me. Ambassador Yara Solis. The last human voice allowed inside this room. The Grand Arbiter of the Galactic Council, a tall silver-skinned being named Saravani Eldervoss, raised one long finger. The chamber went silent the way a deep ocean goes silent, completely, and all at once. The Council has spoken, Eldervoss said in the Galactic Common Tongue, which my bead rendered in clean, flat English. The species designate known as humanity, of the Sol Star System, third orbital body, is hereby removed from provisional membership status. All trading rights are revoked. All relay access is severed. The Sol System is designated a Class 4 quarantine zone. No Council vessel, agent, or affiliate is permitted within 12 light-years of the human home system. This order is permanent and is not subject to appeal. Permanent. Not subject to appeal. I had been in this room before. I had stood at this podium and given speeches about human cooperation, human progress, human potential. I had smiled through every dismissive comment, every interruption, every moment when the Council's older species made it perfectly clear that they considered humanity a temporary curiosity rather than a real member of galactic civilization. And now they were done with the curiosity. The delegate from the Veth Dominion, a reptilian species with green bronze scales and a talent for political maneuvering that bordered on artistry, leaned toward his translator and spoke at length. My bead caught every word. The species known as humans have demonstrated, repeatedly and without remorse, an inability to exist peacefully within the framework of civilized galactic conduct. The incident at the Kepler Belt margin is merely the most recent example of their instinctive aggression. They are young. They are reactive. And they are, frankly, exhausting. The Council does not banish humanity out of fear. We banish them out of common sense. The chamber gave a sound of agreement. In 47 different tones, from 47 different species, it still meant the same thing. I waited until every delegate had finished murmuring. Then I spoke. I hear the Council's decision, I said, and my voice was completely level. I will convey it to Earth without delay. Eldervoss tilted his massive head slightly. He seemed to be waiting for something. A protest, perhaps. An outburst. A plea. I gave him none of those things. Ambassador Solis, he said, almost carefully, you have 30 minutes to vacate the station. I understand, I said. Thank you for the time. I turned and walked out of Chamber 7 at a normal pace. Not fast. Not slow. Just steady. The doors sealed behind me with a sound like the world ending, except the world was not ending at all, and somewhere deep in my chest I knew it. The corridor outside was empty except for my 2 aides, a young man named Peter Cole and a quiet, sharp-eyed woman named Kate Lawson. They fell into step beside me without a word. Peter's face was pale. Kate looked like she was doing mathematics in her head, which she probably was. 29 minutes left, Kate said softly. I know, I said. I need a terminal. She pointed to a data alcove 10 meters ahead without breaking stride. I sat down at the terminal, inserted my council-issued access card, and began pulling files. Everything I was authorized to access, I copied. Navigational charts. Biological databases. Trade route records. Every public filing the Council had ever posted about alien technology, alien biology, alien history. Then I went into the files I was not authorized to access. I had approximately 22 minutes left. It was enough. The files I took were not dramatic. There were no weapon schematics, no secret military plans. What I copied were economic records, specifically, the records of which star systems the Council had quietly suppressed, which species had been denied membership for reasons that had nothing to do with their behavior, and which technologies had been classified not because they were dangerous but because they were competitive. I pulled every one of those files into an encrypted packet and pushed it through a private channel to an address on Earth that did not officially exist. With 4 minutes remaining, I stood up, thanked the terminal for its service in the way that one thanks an inanimate object when one is nervous and trying not to show it, and walked to the docking bay where our transport, the civilian vessel called Constance, was waiting. Captain Leon Marsh met me at the airlock. He was a compact man with gray at his temples and the unhurried manner of someone who had spent 30 years in deep space and found very little there to alarm him. "Rough session," he said. "We've been permanently expelled from the galactic community," I said. "They called it a quarantine." "I know," he said. "Command briefed us 30 minutes ago." That stopped me. 30 minutes ago. The vote only ended. "I know when the vote ended," Leon said. "Command knew before you walked out of the chamber. They've been watching the signal patterns for months." He paused. Then something crossed his face that was not quite a smile but was close enough to be its cousin. "They want us home. They've been waiting." The Constance detached from Vega Prime Station and began its long arc toward the jump point that would carry us back to the Sol system. I stood at the observation window and watched the station shrink to a bright point and then disappear against the star field. My bead chimed once. A text message, Origin Earth, marked priority, and encrypted in a personal cipher I had been given years ago by people whose names I was not supposed to know. I decrypted it. One word. Good. I read it 3 times. Then I allowed myself, in the privacy of that observation window, the luxury of a real smile. Not the diplomatic kind. Not the patient, careful kind I had worn for 30 years inside the council chamber. The genuine kind. The kind that means something is only just beginning. Behind me, Kate Lawson spoke from the doorway. She had a cup of coffee in each hand and the look of someone who had been doing mathematics for a very long time and had finally arrived at an answer she liked. "You know," she said, setting one cup on the ledge beside me, 30 years is a long time to be polite to people who were never going to take us seriously." "Yes," I agreed. "I think," she said slowly, "that this might actually be the best thing that ever happened to us." I picked up the coffee. It was hot and strong and tasted exactly like Earth. "Kate," I said, "I think you might be right." The Constance hummed quietly around us as it crossed the dark between stars, carrying us home to a planet that had apparently already begun preparing for this exact moment, and I watched the stars and thought about the word permanent and found, to my considerable surprise, that it did not frighten me at all. It never had. Part 2. The day they cut us off, Dr. Emeka Nwosu was eating a bowl of oatmeal at his desk and watching a countdown timer on his secondary screen. Not a countdown to disaster. A countdown to completion. The Meridian Drive's 4th calibration sequence had been running for 11 days, and the final numbers were due at exactly 6 in the morning, station time. The relay network shutdown hit at 5:58. Every screen in the laboratory flickered once. The external communications array went dark. The galactic data feed, which they had all quietly taken for granted for 3 decades, simply ceased. No message. No warning signal. Just silence, where there had always been the low hum of the universe talking to itself. Emeka set down his spoon. Around him, in the deep research bay of Lighthouse Station, a facility that officially did not exist, orbiting at the L4 point of Earth's moon, 14 other scientists stopped what they were doing and looked at their screens. Some looked at Emeka. He was the lead physicist on Project Lighthouse, which meant that in moments like this, people looked to him the way passengers on a shaking aircraft look to the flight attendant. Not because he controlled the shaking, but because his face told them how to feel about it. He kept his face calm. "All right," he said. "They did it. We knew they would. Let's check the internal systems and make sure none of our own networks dropped in the interference." The team moved. That was the thing about Lighthouse Station. Every single person there had been selected not just for their scientific ability but for their temperament. They did not panic. They did not freeze. They got to work. Nina Cross, his systems lead, was already pulling up the network diagnostic. She was 29 years old and had the focused, unhurried quality of someone who had decided early in life that most emergencies were really just problems wearing dramatic clothes. Internal systems are clean, she said. Our own relay is functioning normally. We're isolated from the galactic network, but everything we built ourselves is running perfectly. As designed, Emeka said. As designed, she agreed. This was the part that the Galactic Council had never understood about humanity, and in Emeka's opinion it was the most important part. For 30 years, human scientists had been permitted to work alongside galactic technology. They had been given access to research databases. They had been allowed to use Council-approved equipment in Council-approved ways. What no one had told the Council was what the human scientists had been doing during every moment they were not working within those approved boundaries. Studying. Watching. Taking notes. Not stealing, nothing so crude. Just observing, the way a student observes a teacher, and then going home and working out the underlying principles independently, the way any serious student does. The Galactic Council had assumed that because humanity was young, it was slow. It had assumed that because humans were new to the community, they were dependent on the community. It had made a very comfortable assumption, and it had been completely wrong. Project Lighthouse was the proof of that error. It had been running for 11 years in total secrecy, funded through a dozen different research programs with innocuous names, staffed by scientists who had publicly retired, or quietly transferred, or officially taken positions in remote facilities that turned out to be Lighthouse Station. The project had one goal: to achieve full technological independence before the Council decided to end the relationship. Emeka checked the countdown timer. 4 minutes remaining on the meridian calibration sequence. He went back to his oatmeal. Nina watched him eat and shook her head slowly. You are a remarkably calm man, Emeka. I've had 11 years to prepare for this morning, he said. I used the time well. At exactly 6 o'clock, the calibration sequence completed. Emeka put his bowl in the sink, walked to the main laboratory floor, and looked at the numbers. The meridian drive worked. Not in theory. Not in simulation. In reality. The fourth sequence had modeled a clean jump of 4 light-years with a positional error of less than 30 meters. 30 meters. In 4 light-years of transit. The Galactic Council's standard commercial drives averaged a positional error of about 2 kilometers for a similar jump, and they had been developing those drives for 800 years. Emeka had been working on Meridian for 11. He stood very still for a moment, looking at the numbers. Then he sat down in his chair, opened his personal journal file, and began to write. The journal was not an official document. No one had asked him to keep it. He kept it because he was a scientist, and scientists record things, and because he had always had the feeling, that this particular period of history was worth recording carefully. Day 416 since the banishment was announced, he wrote. The Meridian drive has passed its final calibration threshold. 3 years ahead of the most optimistic internal projection. I believe we owe the Galactic Council a certain debt of gratitude. If they had continued to allow us access to their relay network and their research databases, we might have kept borrowing small technologies indefinitely and never been forced to build our own from the ground up. Being cut off was not the disaster they intended it to be. It was the requirement we needed. He saved the entry and closed the file. Over the following weeks, Emeka's journal entries grew longer and more detailed, and the picture they painted was extraordinary. Earth, it turned out, was thriving. The economic disruption of losing galactic trade had been significant but not catastrophic. In the weeks after the banishment, the United Nations had convened an emergency session that lasted 9 days and resulted in something no one had expected: agreement. Not the careful, qualified, endlessly hedged agreement that characterized most international diplomacy, but genuine, committed agreement. Every government on Earth had signed the new cooperative framework within a month. The old arguments, about resources, about territory, about cultural priority, had simply collapsed. When an external force tells every human being simultaneously that they are no longer welcome at the table, the humans tend to stop arguing about who sits where at their own table. The Secretary General had made one statement that cut through every news cycle on the planet and stayed there. She had said, "They gave us our planet back. Let's not waste it." People had put it on signs. On shirts. On the sides of buildings. On the little paper cups that came with office coffee machines. They gave us our planet back. Let's not waste it. Production had increased across every major sector. Research funding had tripled. Universities that had been competing for decades began sharing their most sensitive data freely. Pharmaceutical companies released drug formulations into open commons. Energy corporations shared grid technology. The hoarding stopped. Not everywhere, not all at once, but enough. Enough to matter. Emeka recorded all of it, day by day, with the care of someone who understood that the future would want to know. Then, on day 712, Nina Cross knocked on his office door with an expression he had never seen on her face before. "What is it?" he asked. "You have a message," she said. "Not on any channel I recognize." It came in on a frequency that shouldn't exist. She held out a small card, not digital, actual printed card, which was startling in itself, with 4 words on it. "Come to the anchorage." Emeka stared at the card. "Where is the anchorage?" he asked. Nina's face did a careful thing. "I don't know. But whoever sent this included coordinates. And they are very far from any registered station." "How far?" "Beyond the Council's long-range sensor network," she said quietly. "By about 12 light years." Emeka turned the card over in his hands. On the back, in the same clean print, were 2 more words. "Bring Peter." Peter Cole had not worked at Lighthouse Station. Peter Cole had been Yara Solis's aide. The young man with the pale face who had stood in the corridor outside Chamber 7 on the day of the banishment. Emeka picked up his personal communicator and called a number he had been given years ago and told never to use unless he heard from somewhere unexpected. The line connected immediately. A voice said, simply, "You got the card." "I got the card," Emeka said. "Good. The Constance will pick you up in 48 hours. Pack light. The people you're going to meet have been waiting a long time, and they are very interested in that drive of yours." The line cut. Emeka sat very still for a long moment. Then he opened his journal and typed one final entry for the chapter of Lighthouse Station as he had known it. Day 712. "We are not, it seems, the only ones who have been preparing. I suspect the Council has made enemies in many directions, and I suspect those enemies have been watching us the way we were watching the Council. I also suspect, and this is the part that fills me with a feeling I can only describe as profound, unreasonable excitement, that the real work is only just beginning." He closed the journal, stood up, and went to find something to pack. Part 3. The anchorage was not on any chart. It hung in the dark between 2 unnamed stars at a distance from the galactic core that most Council cartographers classified as simply empty. It had no beacon. It emitted no navigational signal. Even the Constance, which had been given the coordinates in advance, nearly missed it on final approach, because the anchorage was designed to look like nothing from every direction except one, and the one direction from which it revealed itself was the direction you were coming from if you already knew it was there. Commander Reyes Alvarez had been told very little. He had been told to board the Constance. He had been told the journey would take 11 days. He had been told to bring his formal uniform and his best diplomatic patience. His superior officer, a careful woman named Carol Dent who ran the Earth Defense Directorate's most classified division, had looked at him across her desk and said, "What you are about to see is going to change your understanding of our situation completely. Try not to let it show on your face when it does." Reyes had a very good face for not showing things. 22 years in the Defense Directorate had given him that. He stood now at the Constance's forward observation window and looked at the anchorage, and he worked very hard at his face. The station was enormous. Larger than any human-built structure in space. Larger than Vega Prime, even, which had been the largest artificial structure Reyes had ever seen. But its size was not the thing that changed his understanding. Size was just engineering. It was the ship's dock to the anchorage that changed everything. Reyes had spent years studying alien vessel profiles. Every species that had ever dealt with the Council had a recognizable design language, recognizable to someone who had made it his business to know. And as the Constance moved closer, he counted configurations he recognized from files that were sealed at the highest classification levels Earth possessed. Yari. The ancient insectoid species that had been expelled from the Council 400 years ago. Their ships were long and dark and asymmetrical in a way that suggested the builders thought about physics from a very different angle than most species did. A pair of deep, rounded vessels that could only be Merat construction. The Merat were a silicon-based species that the Council had classified as pre-civilized because they did not build in materials the Council considered sophisticated. The Council had been wrong about that too. 3 ships of a design Reyes did not recognize at all. Sleek. Impossibly clean. Constructed from something that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. And humans. 6 human vessels. 2 of them military. 12 species, minimum. All here. All docked at a station that did not exist, in a location the Council did not know about. Reyes kept his face still. Peter Cole, sitting beside him, let out a long, slow breath. This has been going on for a while, hasn't it? Yes, said Leon Marsh from the pilot's seat. A while. The docking process was smooth and unhurried. When the Constance's airlock opened, Reyes was met by 3 figures. The first was Carol Dent, who had apparently arrived before him, which meant she had taken a faster ship and not mentioned it. The second was Yara Solis, who looked exactly like her official photographs except that she was standing the way people stand when they have been carrying a secret for a very long time and have finally been allowed to set it down. The third figure stood slightly apart, and it was the third figure that required all of Reyes's considerable facial discipline. It was tall. 6 feet at minimum, and the build was wrong for a human, too many joints in the limbs, the shoulders too narrow for the height. Its skin, if it was skin, was a deep gold brown and had a faint texture to it, like very fine scales that had been worn smooth over many years. Its eyes were a pale amber and had horizontal pupils. It was wearing what appeared to be a simple gray garment with no decoration, and its hands, 4 fingers, 1 opposable thumb, similar enough to human to be immediately readable, were folded in front of it with the patience of something very old. Commander Alvarez, Yara said. This is Elder Hesh of the Yari. Elder Hesh inclined its head toward Reyes in a gesture that carried the clear meaning of respect without the need for a translator. We have been watching your species for a very long time, Elder Hesh said. The English was perfect. It had the careful cadence of someone who had learned the language from recordings rather than from human company, but it was fluent and precise. We chose to wait. We needed to be certain. And then your council did what councils always do, eventually. They made an enemy of the one species they should have welcomed most. Reyes found his voice. You've been in contact with Earth for how long? 7 years, Carol said. Since before the banishment. We made initial contact through the Shepherd Commission. Elder Hesh's people gave us the location of this station and the means to reach it without council detection. In return, we shared what we had been developing at Lighthouse. Reyes turned this over carefully in his mind. 7 years of secret diplomacy. 11 species already in contact before the council even voted. The banishment had not been a catastrophe falling on an unprepared species. It had been the opening move of a plan that was already in motion. Who else is here? He asked. Carol led him through the station. It was not luxurious, but it was well designed, practical spaces that multiple species could use comfortably. They passed a common area where 2 humans were sitting across a low table from a pair of Merat, their silicon crystalline skin catching the station light. Further on, a Yari technician was working alongside a human engineer on something that looked like a communications array unlike anything Reyes had seen before. 11 species. Counting humanity, 12. Carol named them as they walked. The Yari, expelled 4 centuries ago. The Merat, never admitted despite 3 applications. The Coven, a warm-blooded species who had been admitted to the council and then quietly expelled when they refused to stop trading with the Yari. The Thul, who were small and fast-moving and had technology and energy generation that made Reyes's eyes widen when he glanced at the technical summary Carol handed him. The Oran Collective, who communicated in harmonics and had been classified by the council as non-sapient, which was one of the most spectacular errors of judgment in galactic history. And the unnamed 3, the ships with the light-absorbing hulls. Carol paused before telling him. The Vorath, she said. They don't use names the way we do. They're old. Older than the Yari. They were building faster-than-light drives before the Council's founding species had developed basic chemistry. They went quiet about 800 years ago, and the Council assumed they had declined. They didn't decline, Reyes said. It was not a question. They were watching, Carol said. And waiting for something worth coming back for. Reyes stopped walking. He stood in the corridor of a secret station 12 light-years from Council space and absorbed the full weight of what he was being told. 12 species. Technologies that the Council had suppressed, misclassified, or simply never discovered because it had stopped looking past its own interests centuries ago. An organization that had been building quietly, patiently, for years. For decades, in some cases. For centuries, in one. And at the center of it, the Shepherd Commission. Human. Quiet. Careful. Angry in the right direction. That last phrase came from Elder Hesh, who used it when Reyes finally asked the question he had been assembling since the airlock. Why us, he said to the Elder, in a small room that smelled faintly of the ozone and something else that the Yari seemed to carry with them. Why wait for humanity specifically? You have been here for 400 years. You have 11 other species. Why did you wait? Elder Hesh was quiet for a moment. Then it said, because most species, when they are hurt, become afraid. Or they become hard. They build walls inside themselves to match the walls that were built around them. But humans, and I say this having observed many, many species, humans get angry. Not at each other. Not always, at least. When the pressure is strong enough, and the cause is clear enough, humans get angry at the injustice itself. They point at the problem. And then they fix it. It paused. We needed someone who would not just survive being expelled. We needed someone who would use it. Reyes was quiet for a long time after that. Then he asked to see the Meridian Drive test results, and the Vorath energy models, and the Orin communication technology, and the full technical library the Coalition had assembled over the years. He spent the next 16 hours reading. At the end of those 16 hours, he went back to Elder Hesh and said, I'd like to discuss how we announce this. Announce, the Elder said. To the Council, Reyes said. Not yet. Not now. But eventually. Because the point of all this is not to hide forever. Elder Hesh regarded him with those amber eyes for a long moment. Then it made a sound that Reyes's translator bead rendered as, amusement, warm, with a quality of vindication. No, Elder Hesh agreed. The point was never to hide. The point was to be ready. Then let's make sure we're ready, Reyes said. He pulled out his notebook, actual paper, because paper left no digital trace, and began to write. Part 4. 3 years after the banishment, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session. The session was not announced publicly. Nothing was announced publicly. The Council preferred to manage its difficulties the way old institutions always do, quietly, internally, with great attention to the appearance of control. The reason for the session was a report from their long-range monitoring division. The report was 72 pages long and had been classified at the highest level the moment it was completed. I was not supposed to know about it. I knew about it anyway. My name is Yara Solis, and 3 years after walking out of Chamber 7, I was the Secretary of Interstellar Affairs for the Coalition of the Expelled. That title did not yet appear on any official document, because the Coalition had not yet made itself official. But the work was real. The organization was real. And the intelligence network, built slowly, carefully, through the Vorath's fold space relay system that the Council did not know existed, was very real. The report said, essentially, that something was wrong with the quarantine. Specifically, it said that 17 star systems which had been economically dependent on Council trade routes had quietly begun routing their commerce through a different network. Not through the Council's relay points. Not through any mapped infrastructure. Through something that should not have been there, because the Council had not built it and had no record of anyone else building it. The Council's analysts had spent 3 months trying to locate the source. They had not found it, because the source was the anchorage and its 11 sister stations, distributed across the dark between stars with the care of people who had been hiding from the Council for a very long time and were very good at it. The 17 systems said nothing. They filed no declarations. They sent no formal communications. They simply redirected their freight and paid their transit fees to accounts that traced to holding companies that traced to other holding companies that eventually dissolved into numerical codes that led nowhere the Council's investigators could follow. But the goods moved. And the Council could see the goods moving, even if it could not see the road they traveled. The session lasted 4 days. At the end of it, a decision was made. A formal communication was sent to the Sol system. It was addressed to the Sol Quarantine Authority, which was the Council's official designation for whatever administrative body humanity had presumably formed to manage its own isolation. I read it in my office on Lighthouse Station, where I had been working for the past 18 months. Peter Cole, now my chief of staff rather than my aide, a promotion he had earned 3 times over, stood beside me as I read. When I finished, I handed it to him. He read it. His eyebrows rose slowly. "They want to meet," he said. "They want to meet," I confirmed. "With us." "With the Sol Quarantine Authority," I said. "Which does not exist." "So we need to decide who replies," Peter said carefully. I looked out the window at the star field. 3 years ago, I had looked at a similar star field from the Constants and felt the weight of everything we had lost. Now I felt something different. Not triumph, exactly. Something quieter and steadier than triumph. "I'll reply," I said. "Not as the Sol Quarantine Authority. As the Coalition of the Expelled." Peter made a small sound. "That's going to be a significant moment." "Yes," I said. "It is." I composed the reply myself. I did not ask for help, and I did not edit it more than twice. Sometimes the first words are the right words, and overworking them removes something essential. The message said, "The entity you have addressed as the Sol Quarantine Authority does not exist. Your communication has been received by the Office of the Secretary of Interstellar Affairs, Coalition of the Expelled. We are available to meet at a time and location of mutual convenience. We request that all 49 member species of the Coalition be recognized as parties to any discussions." 49. The Council's response took 11 hours. When you understand that the Council typically responded to formal diplomatic communications within minutes, 11 hours told you everything you needed to know about the state of the emergency session. In those 11 hours, I was not idle. I called Commander Reyes Alvarez, who was now heading our newly formalized Fleet Coordination Office. I called Elder Hesh, who was on a Yari vessel somewhere near the Coalition's outermost station and answered within 30 seconds, which meant the Elder had been waiting for exactly this call. I called Dr. Emeka Nwosu, who was running the second-generation Meridian Drive project and sounded distracted in the way of someone who has been deep inside a problem for 16 hours and is slightly annoyed at being pulled out of it. Then I called Captain Leon Marsh and told him to have the Constants, which had become something of an unofficial flagship through sheer consistency of presence, ready to move on 4 hours' notice. By the time the Council's reply arrived, I had 49 species informed, a fleet configuration planned, and a communications strategy agreed upon. The plan had 3 components. The first was diplomatic. The second was practical. The third was what Emeka called the demonstration, and what Reyes called the reminder, and what Elder Hesh called, with that characteristic dry quality, the understatement. The Council's reply agreed to meet. It recognized, with visible reluctance visible even in the formal language of galactic diplomatic protocol, that additional parties to the Sol situation existed and would need to be addressed. It proposed a meeting at Vega Prime Station. I replied, "We suggest a neutral location. We will provide coordinates." They agreed. The location we chose was a point in open space, equidistant from the Council's nearest relay hub and the Coalition's outermost station. No one's territory. No one's home ground. A plain of stars with nothing in it, which was the point. The Council sent a delegation of 7 ships. Impressive, heavily armed, with the deliberate display of sensor arrays and hull markings that militaries use when they want to make a point about capability without making an actual move. When they arrived at the coordinates, they found the Coalition already there. Not 7 ships. Not 20 ships. 41 vessels, one from each of the Coalition species with the technological capacity to send a representative craft, spread in a wide, unhurried arc across the meeting point. Not weapons ready. Not in any attack formation. Just present. The way mountains are present. The way deep water is present. And at the center of the arc, alone, the Constants. Leon Marsh brought it in without fanfare and parked it at the exact geometric center of the meeting point. He then opened a broadcast channel on all Council frequencies and said, in his calm, unhurried voice, "We are not here to fight. We are here to be seen. The council delegation held position for 4 hours before responding. 4 hours. Emeka told me afterward that he spent those 4 hours running engine diagnostics on the second-generation Meridian drive and trying not to laugh, which he described as one of the more difficult things he had done in his career. When the council delegation finally responded, it was to request a formal session. We agreed. The session was held aboard a neutral vessel provided by the Mirati, a council member species who had abstained from the original banishment vote and who had, 3 days earlier, made a quiet announcement that caused the council's emergency session to extend by another full day. They had joined the coalition. The Mirati delegate, a tall and elegant being named Councillor Aveth, had issued a statement that was brief and precise and that was already being quoted across 17 star systems. The Galactic Council was built to serve the interests of civilization, Councillor Aveth had said. When it begins to serve only the interests of its founders, it ceases to be the council it claims to be. We are choosing to serve civilization. The Veth Dominion, who had started all of this with their manufactured incident at the Kepler Belt, sent a protest to the council. The council's response time to the Veth was 3 days. Previously, the Veth had received responses within hours. Small changes. Quiet changes. But I had spent 30 years learning to read the council's temperature from exactly these kinds of signals. The temperature was dropping. In the formal session, aboard the Mirati ship, the council's lead negotiator, an old and very senior Saravani named Administrator Koveal, opened with what was clearly intended to be a conciliatory statement. It acknowledged that certain developments had occurred since the banishment that merited discussion. It expressed the council's continued commitment to galactic stability and cooperative governance. It did not apologize. It did not acknowledge error. It did not address the 49 species who had been ignored, expelled, or misclassified over the centuries of the council's existence. Elder Hesh responded. Not me. This was deliberate. Humanity had built the coalition. Humanity had provided the technology, the intelligence network, and the diplomatic architecture that had made this moment possible. But humanity sat in the second row and let Elder Hesh speak. The coalition is not here to seek permission, Elder Hesh said. We are not applying for membership. We are not requesting reconsideration of any prior decisions. We are informing the Council that the existing structure of galactic governance is no longer the only structure of galactic governance. We are a functioning alternative. And we are growing. Administrator Koveal was very still. What is it you want? Elder Hesh said, we want what has always been the correct answer. Equal representation. Transparent process. No permanent vetoes. An end to the practice of suppressing species for competitive rather than genuine reasons. These are not demands. They are the terms on which a larger conversation becomes possible. There was a long silence. I sat in the second row and kept my face quiet and thought about the word permanent, and how it had sounded 3 years ago in Chamber 7, and how it sounded now. It sounded different now. It sounded like a door that was beginning, very slowly, to open. I had an address prepared. I had written it on the Constance, during the transit to the meeting point, in the same careful way I had once written diplomatic speeches for Chamber 7. It was shorter than those speeches. It had taken less time to write. When the session paused for a recess, I transmitted it back to Earth, and it was broadcast across the Sol system, and I was told afterward that people listened to it in offices and on transit trains and in cafes, and that when it was finished some of them were very quiet for a while. It said, they built walls to keep us small. We used the walls to learn how to fly. We are not returning to beg for the sky. We are already in it. We are asking the rest of the galaxy to join us there, honestly, fairly, and without the old habits of fear. That was all. It was enough. Part 5. I wrote this 5 years after the Vega Accord. I wrote it not because anyone asked me to, not because there was a record to maintain. The official records are kept by people far more organized than I am, but because I sat down one evening at the observation window of my new office in the Assembly of Worlds Administrative Hub, which orbits Earth at a very comfortable altitude, and I looked at the stars, and I thought about how different they look when you know what is in them. 5 years ago, those stars held mystery and threat in equal proportion. Now they held something more complicated and more interesting, which I think is a fair description of how most good things develop. Let me tell you what happened. Not the public version. You can find that in any database in the 49 member systems of the Assembly of Worlds. I mean the version underneath the official version. The version with the small moments in it, which are always the ones that tell the true shape of a story. The Council's response to Elder Hesch's statement, in that first session aboard the Mirati ship, was to request a 2-week recess. This was granted. During the recess, I received 3 private communications that were not supposed to exist. The first was from Administrator Kovail, who asked, in carefully neutral language, whether the Coalition would be open to a preliminary technical exchange, specifically, whether the Coalition would share the Meridian Drive schematics in exchange for access to certain Council research databases that had never been made available to provisional member species. I brought this to Emeka. He read the message twice and said, they want to buy cooperation with information they should have shared 30 years ago. Yes, I said. And what do you want to do? I want to say no, I said. But not for the reason they're expecting. I replied to Administrator Kovail that the Meridian Drive was already freely shared among all 49 Coalition species, and that its schematics would be released to the public galactic database within 6 months regardless of the outcome of any negotiations. The information was not for sale because it was not ours to sell. It belonged to everyone. Kovail did not respond for 2 days. When he did, the message was shorter than his usual communications. It said, I see. 2 words. I see. I thought about that for a long time afterward. About what it meant when someone who had spent a very long career inside a system that treated knowledge as currency encountered someone who simply gave it away. About whether that was confusing to him or clarifying. About whether it changed anything in the architecture of how he thought about what we were doing. The second private communication came from a direction I had not expected. It came from within the Veth Dominion. Not from the government, from a private individual. A researcher named Dr. Orla Vethsin, who, despite sharing the species name, was apparently not comfortable with what her government had done. Her message was long and carefully written and full of the particular quality of someone who has been trying to say something important for a very long time and has finally found a channel through which to say it. She laid out, in considerable detail, the internal records of the Kepler Belt incident, the real ones, not the version presented to the Council. She confirmed what the Shepherd Commission had long suspected: the incident had been manufactured. It had been designed to give the Council a reason to act on a desire it already had. Her government had calculated that humanity would be expelled within the decade regardless. They had simply accelerated the timeline. She sent the records as an attached file. I sat with that file for a full day before deciding what to do with it. Reyes, when I told him about it, said, publish it. Peter, when I told him about it, said, what do you want to achieve? Elder Hesch, when I told it about it, said nothing for a very long moment, and then said, what did you decide before you asked anyone? That was, as usual, the right question. What I decided was this: I sent the file to Administrator Kovail. Directly. Privately. With a note that said only, we have had this for some time. We chose to resolve things through conversation rather than confrontation. We are still choosing that. We hope the Council will make the same choice. I never published the file. I never used it as leverage. I never mentioned it in a negotiation. Kovail released it himself, 6 weeks later, through the Council's official transparency office. He filed it as a historical accountability document, which is the Council's formal mechanism for acknowledging that something went wrong without requiring any specific individual to be blamed. The Veth government issued a statement that was both measured and visibly uncomfortable. They acknowledged that the Kepler Belt incident had been misrepresented. They did not use the word manufactured. They did not apologize to humanity specifically. But they released 3 years of embargoed trade permissions to coalition member systems the following week, quietly, without announcement. Goods began to move. The temperature changed. That was the third private communication, in its way, not a message but an action. The language that old institutions speak best. Not words. Gestures. By the time the formal negotiations resumed, the shape of the conversation had changed. The Council came back to the table without the posture it had carried in the first session. Administrator Kovail still chose his words with extreme care. He still represented an institution that had spent centuries building habits of superiority that do not dissolve in a month. But the posture was different. The certainty was different. We negotiated for 4 months. I will not pretend it was smooth. Nothing with 49 species in the room is ever smooth. The Thul and the Coven disagreed about representation ratios so passionately that 3 sessions had to be paused while their respective delegations cooled down. The Oran Collective, communicating in harmonics, nearly caused a catastrophic misunderstanding in the 8th week when a translation error converted their statement of enthusiastic agreement into an apparent declaration of commercial hostility. Emeka stayed up for 36 hours helping the translation team rebuild the Oran communication protocol from scratch. I drank a great deal of coffee. Peter drank even more. But we negotiated, and at the end of 4 months we had the Galactic Accord of Equals. It was not a perfect document. No document produced by 49 species and one collapsing institution is going to be perfect. But it was honest, and it was fair, and it contained, in clear language that every translation protocol in the galaxy could render correctly, the core principles that Elder Hesh had described in that first session as the terms on which a larger conversation becomes possible. Equal representation. Transparent process. No permanent vetoes. No suppression of species for competitive advantage. The old council was formally dissolved on a morning that happened to be raining in New York, where the final ratification ceremony was held. It rained the way New York rains in early autumn, sideways and generous and completely indifferent to the significance of the occasion. The delegates gathered under a large tent on the grounds of a building that had once housed a different international assembly, a much older one, the kind of assembly that humanity had built before it ever knew there was a galaxy to have opinions about. Reyes stood beside me under the tent, rain drumming on the canvas above us, and said, "Do you think they understand what they agreed to?" "Not entirely," I said. "But understanding comes from living with something. We'll see how they live with it." The first session of the Assembly of Worlds took place 6 weeks later aboard a station that had been built, at remarkable speed, by a joint construction team of 12 species. The station orbited Earth. This was the Coalition's choice and the Council's acceptance. It had been the point of most extended argument in the entire negotiation, because the founding species of the old Council had wanted the new Assembly's hub to orbit a neutral star. The Coalition had held firm. Not out of pride. Out of principle. The Assembly of Worlds should orbit a world that had been told it was not welcome in the universe and had responded by building a new one. The symbolism was correct. At the first session, humanity sat in the back row. This too was deliberate. Elder Hesh gave the opening address. Dr. Orla Vethsin, who had defected from the Veth Dominion and joined the Coalition's diplomatic staff, translated it into Veth for the benefit of her former government's representatives, who sat in the front row looking as though they were eating something unpleasant and had decided to finish it with dignity. I watched from the back row and tried to memorize all of it. The particular quality of the light through the station's observation panels. The sound of 49 species breathing the same recycled air. The way Elder Hesh's voice carried in the chamber, not loud, but present, the way very old and certain things are present. Afterward, Emeka sent me a message. 3 words. "They're calling us architects now." I was at the observation window when it arrived. The same window where I now sit writing this. Earth below, broad and patient and blue. Stars above, full of all the things that are out there, none of which scare me the way they might have scared me if I had not spent the last 8 years learning what we are capable of. I thought about the word banished. I thought about how heavy it had felt in that translator bead, in Chamber 7, in a station so far from home. I thought about the one-word message that had been waiting for me on the Constance. Good. I thought about all the years of preparation that single word represented. All the people who had worked in rooms that did not officially exist, building things that were not supposed to be possible, staying patient when patience was the hardest choice. I thought about Nina Cross and her 17-hour calibration sequences. About Leon Marsh's unhurried voice on the broadcast channel, telling the Council's 7 warships that we were there to be seen. About Reyes in his paper notebook, writing strategy with a pen because paper left no trace. About Peter, who went from pale-faced aide to the most effective chief of staff I have ever seen, on a career path that had begun in a corridor outside Chamber 7 when everything had looked like an ending and he had stood up straight and kept moving. I thought about Elder Hesh, who had waited 4 centuries for a species angry in the right direction. And I thought about the Vorith, who had spent 800 years so silent that the council thought they had declined, while in fact they had been watching and refining and learning and waiting for something worth coming back for. What a strange galaxy this is. What a full and complicated and occasionally breathtaking galaxy. What a species we are. I know the history files will say this was a triumph. And it was. But triumph is too clean a word for what it actually felt like, day by day. It felt like work. It felt like long meetings and cold coffee and arguments about translation protocols at 2 a.m. It felt like the specific exhaustion of doing something important without any guarantee that it would be enough. It also felt, in the moments between those long meetings, like something I will struggle to name correctly. Pride seems too small. Joy is closer, but joy suggests ease, and this was never easy. What I felt, and what I think most of us felt, was something like the satisfaction of a species that was told it was not enough, and decided to find out whether that was actually true, and found out that it was not. We are not enough, the council said. We are done with you. Go home. And we went home, and we built, and we waited, and we learned, and we connected, and we grew, and one morning we parked a ship in open space and said we are here to be seen, and the universe looked at us, and it kept looking, and eventually it said, "All right. Show us." And we did. They gave us our planet back. We were not wasteful with it. End.